Well, welcome everybody to this town hall on climate security, degrees of instability, climate security in a warming world. My name's Erin Sikorsky. I'm going to be moderating the conversation today. I direct the Center for Climate and Security and the International Military Council on Climate and Security based in Washington, D.C. And I worked in the U.S. intelligence community for a long time on these topics, so I'm really excited to see this here at a town hall at the Munich Security Conference. Anyone who was following the climate negotiations in Belém last fall saw the Secretary General of the UN, admit publicly that the targets of the Paris Agreement are going to be very difficult to meet, that we're already heading into a world past 1.5 degrees of warming. And what that means is greater instability, more extreme weather events, right, that are coming more frequently and more intensely than ever before. And these have real implications for security services. Already we see militaries around the world deployed to respond to climate disasters. They're often on the front lines of these crises. We see billions of dollars of cost to military and security infrastructure, the increase in instability and conflict and geopolitical competition over food and water, all coming at a time, though, when the conversation about security in some places seems to be narrowing a bit, where food and climate and its impacts on water are seen as adjacent or optional compared to more central defense and security concerns. I think we're all here for this conversation today because we think that would be a strategic error. That in a world of cascading risks, right, countries don't have the luxury of only focusing on one thing at a time. They have to be able to take more than one issue, and climate change is not going to wait its turn. So I'm going to stop talking now because really who you want to hear from is our amazing panel here. We'll have some time at the end for questions as well. I'm going to start with our representative from India, Minister Sitharaman. India is definitely at the forefront of a lot of climate security shocks. You have heat extremes that are they're coming more frequently, they're lasting longer. Your military, too, is often responding to these events. I know you served as Minister of Defense before serving as the Minister of Finance. How are you seeing climate change affecting patterns of vulnerability and instability and your security in India?
Well, I think you put on a lot of things in that one question.
I know.
I'll just break it down for simplicity's sake, but I don't mean to suggest that each operate in its own silos. They all work together. The first one is about working for climate and saving, let's say, the climate from human actions. That is one thing we need to address, no doubt. But equally, countries like India are worried about communities which are affected by climate change, their livelihoods, their, let us say, future, the kind of massive disruptions they face because of relocating, going back because of the sentimental value that it is their own village, and so on. So the government is going to have to look at saving climate for itself, because that has long-term implication on all of us, and equally saving communities from the changes which happen because of climate change. So we are, especially because our population is so huge, we have both these, one which is very critical for the world, the other immediacy of the problem where people are affected. So we are grappling with both equally and prioritizing also on immediate attention to people whose lives have been disrupted because of climate change. Second, most of us know that today everything that we do has a technology component to it. Now, technology is one thing when you're talking of climate change, is very well. But what it doesn't do is, if this technology cannot adapt or subsume or talk to those technologies which are playing an important role in our lives, like, for instance, electricity. I'm not even talking about payment systems, which are also digital. I'm talking about electrification. Look at, if I can take anecdotes, Europe, Spain, Netherlands, have had extraordinarily impactful disruptions because we are still having systems which don't talk to each other. Renewable energy generated goes to the system, the grid, but the grid is unable to take it when there is a surge from renewable energy. You still have that problem. Spain suffered from it. Similarly, fairly archaic structures through which electricity is being distributed, Netherlands being one case, the system is unable to cope. You need the transitional time when all of this can be brought on. That's a second type of problem. India also faces that. But I think we are slightly better off because we are a late starter, but we are going ahead with it. The third is, I think, not just emission, which is a very important factor, no doubt. Not just emission, but looking at ways in which we have resilient societies, resilient communities, resilient ways in which we can adapt to the changes that are happening. It's one thing to have excessive rain, your crops are gone, or it's one thing to have drought, which India is fairly frequently posed with, but another where you have to tell the farmers he should have a better resilient crop, diversify his crop, not just be dependent on rain. When it fails, it's you. So that's another. And the final is the point that you raised about defense and your security preparedness. Yes, India has serious problems because India, I think, is the only country, if I can say with some confidence, which has terrains of all sorts. We fight in deserts. We have a huge ocean. We have seaboards, both eastern and western, huge navy, huge manpower army, and wet Myanmar-like forests, which are rain and very humid, immediately rising to high-altitude mountains. So our warfare and our soldiers and our equipments will have to be adapted at all these places. Climate change is disrupting even that.
Wonderful. You said I asked a lot in my question, but you gave us so much in your answer as well. And I'm really glad you brought up kind of the differentiation between the long-term security imperative of cutting emissions, but also the more immediate adaptation to the risks that are already here. Right. I think that's so critical. Minister Schneider, I was talking to your staff before we started, and they noted this is the first time a Minister of Environment from Germany has been at MSC, so thank you so much for being here. Germany's long been a leader on the climate, peace, and security front, and actually at this conference last year, you released an intelligence assessment of climate security risks. The head of your intelligence community noted that climate was in the top 5 risks facing the country. We're having different conversations this year at MSC after a summer where the NATO summit talked about putting 5% of GDP into defense. 1.5% of that can be resilience. How are you thinking about, those risks that were identified by the intelligence community, the need for resilience to climate, and where are there opportunities to think about government spending and defense investments where you get co-benefits for climate change?
Yeah, thanks a lot, and welcome to the theater here in Munich. Welcome you all. It's clear for us that, and not only a security issue, even as in the economic issue, if you look at the Davos survey, top 10 threats to the economy, 5 of them were ecological climate issues in the next 10 years. So it's a threat to our to the growth and to the livelihood of the people. And the security issues, we changed it. To make one point clear, Germany stays on a multilateral stance. We support the IPCC and the United Nations. We want to work together with different countries, other countries on the world, to prevent climate change. And there is a success. I mean, if we wouldn't have had the Paris Agreement, then it would be 5 degrees warmer in the next years to come, and so it's we are going to 3, and our aim is to keep it at 1.5. This is our aim, and we invest a lot of money and the change of our societies, the supply system of our energy. For instance, we improved renewables, the grid. 70% of renewables are sometimes in the grid, and it works. the perception by the engineers were less, it's possible up to 40% or 50 10 years ago, and now they can manage with 70. So there is huge progress, and we believe in science to say that on that point. And the finance, you mentioned the spending for defense. Yes, there was too less spending in the last decades. I was long serving in the budget committee. We had this peace dividend after 1990, and we lowered our expenditure for our security issues. And now in Germany we changed our law, the Grundgesetz, the basic law, to have more money for financing via debt for the security. That means I don't have to take it away from the climate issues. And the next month, in March, I present the German climate protection program for the next 5 years and until 2040, 90% reduction. It's a question of laws and it's a question of money. And I'm looking forward to it with my colleagues. Beyond the last differences we have, but our aim is to reach 65% less emissions in 2030, and I'm convinced that we can manage it. And as you've heard yesterday in the speech of Merz, of our Chancellor, he was aware of the situation that we have and that we will stay within our climate agreements that Germany has signed and that we are going to fulfill, even with the adaptation.
Wonderful. That's great. And I mean, as you point out, 1.7 is better than 2, 2 is better than 3, right? We need to continue to focus on the emissions cuts. And as you say, we can find ways to both continue our climate commitments and the really critical defense commitments. They're not either or. The two, I think, go hand in hand. Senator Whitehouse, it's very nice to share the stage with you again here on these topics. I was in this room last night listening to some other American colleagues talk about foreign policy, and the U.S. ambassador to NATO was actually asked about climate security directly, and he said, I think if I remember the quote correctly, I'm not a climate denier, but I'm a climate skeptic. And we have Secretary of Defense Hegseth, who is perhaps a little less diplomatic in how he talks about climate change these days. But yet we have many military officers, uniformed military officers, including the first Secretary of Defense for President Trump in his first term, Secretary Mattis, who've seen these challenges on the front lines and are very pragmatic and recognize the threats climate poses. From your perch in the Senate, how do you see the U.S. role in managing these climate security risks?
Well, let me start by observing that a senior official of the United States of America this morning took the stage at the Munich Security Conference and described climate science as a cult. So let me apologize for that. That, to put it mildly, is a comment that will not age well. What we are seeing in the United States is the leading edge of climate insecurity coming at us economically. The fossil fuel industry specializes in lying about what the future looks like if we don't deal with their emissions. But the insurance industry can't lie about that. They have huge fiduciary obligations to get it right. They have massive financial incentives to get it right. And what you're seeing now is the insurance industry in America leaving entire states. Where they're not leaving entire states, they are non-renewing thousands and thousands of individual customers. And where they're not renewing, they're either raising rates or making demands like, you have to put a new roof on your house to keep your insurance. And that is the opening stage of an economic cascade that goes from insurance market failure to mortgage market failure to property values crash to recession. And I wish I could say this was just a United States problem, but a year ago, The Economist magazine published a warning that there's a $25 trillion hit coming to global real estate markets because of this phenomenon. And it's not a warning that's coming out of green areas. You know, I love Greenpeace. You guys are the greatest. This isn't you guys warning this stuff. This is like the chairman of the Fed saying that in 10 years, whole regions of the United States will no longer have mortgages. This is the chief economist of Freddie Mac, our enormous mortgage company, predicting a 2008-style recession from this cascade, starting just with coastal property values crashing. Of course, the evil sibling is wildfire, causing a similar crash. So I think what we are going to see is the immediacy of that economic effect, which is now on the ground, alive and well, causing American families to suffer economically and going to become, I think, a major political question. That is going to work its way back into the conversation so that we go back to being fact-based about this question. What this administration is saying about climate change can literally only be put in the category of corruption. And I think as a society, we have to face the fact that the fossil fuel industry has built the largest apparatus of fraudulent misinformation and dark money political corruption in the history of the species. And to ignore that and not address it as an immediate menace, I think is one of the things that we've been missing in the climate conversation.
Great. I'm so glad you brought up misinformation. I think clearly your comments are resonating, and I think people are happy to hear that there are still folks in America who are very concerned about this topic. I'm going to ask folks about dis and misinformation in a second, but now I want to turn to you, Mads, with Greenpeace. I think some people might see your name on this roundtable and say, why is the head of Greenpeace at the Munich Security Conference? And so I'm going to ask you, what do you hope to get out of conversations here? Why do you think it's so important to bring the climate issue to this kind of security audience?
I'm surprised that anyone would be surprised about seeing us here. I mean, I think, and maybe I feel like a broken record, like I'm sure many of the scientists that have been talking about climate change and the systemic impact that would cascade through all our systems, economic, food, other human security issues. I mean, this is all over the place. We've been at this since the early 90s, and yeah, we are on the inside, like these conventions. Yesterday, we were outside with a banner and one of the cranes just 50 meters down the street talking about the problems of gas imports into Europe. So I think we have to be at it. I think at these conferences, we've been telling each other for a long time that those least responsible for the climate crisis, the planetary crisis, are those who are being hit hardest by it. That remains to be true, but it's also changing. It's clear we will all be impacted. As you mentioned, we passed the first tipping point officially now with the 99% probability of loss of warm water corals. We are in the danger zone now, the 1.5 to 2 degrees, where we are talking about the loss of the Amazon rainforest, where we are talking about the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, and we are fast approaching some of these really systemic-wide tipping points, whether it's the AMOC, the ocean current in the North Atlantic, or some of the other systemic tipping points that will have civilization disruption potential on a local, on a regional, and perhaps also global level in a foreseeable future. If that's not security, what is? So I think that this must be front and center. I mean, we are in Europe, so allow me to say a little bit about the European context, because my fear is that right now we on the what to do about it, how to recognize this situation to be, and I think Vanessa spoke well about the situation in the US, but there is also a tendency that European leaders that are here in Munich are looking at US and saying, you're the bad guys, while taking some decisions right here, right now, that is not going in the right direction. We know what the number one, you could say, under-mitigated risk is, that is our dependency on fossil fuels. That is the slowness with which we phase out fossil fuels. That must be front and center. And right now, this is not going nearly fast enough. That's the broken record part. And we all know that. But we ask ourselves, why is it happening? We are transitioning away from Russian gas. That's good in 2027 here in Europe. But of course, we are dramatically increasing our dependency on LNG from the US. Approaching maybe 60% of our LNG from the US already here in a few years' time. $200 billion of contracts has been signed just in the last 2 years with the US. This is taking us into gas dependency way into the 30s, maybe past the 35, thereby also putting us in a situation where we are on no track in Europe to become fossil fuel free. And this is a huge problem. At the same time, with the other hand, unfortunately, we also see in Europe that we are applying a little bit the same playbook that you talked about that is happening in the US, where short-term financial interest, corporate interest are pushing under the skies of simplification of legislation, is pushing through deregulations that is undermining the progress that Europe has made over these past decades. This is hugely problematic and showing up in international conventions and not playing that role that we need Europe to play in a situation where US is developing in the direction it is. This is a shame. It takes the possibilities of building real partnerships with India, with our African neighbors, building these real partnerships where real solution lies. So I think that would be my big plea to this meeting, to these leaders that are showing up. But thank you for creating a space for talking about climate as well, because in the last few years, there's not been so much at the Munich Security Conference space for those conversations.
Thank you. And thanks for bringing up the tipping points piece. I think that's a really important part of the conversation. We're reaching potentially some irreversible changes and challenges to our climate and with huge security impacts and a lot of uncertainty going forward. And that uncertainty is amplified by the disinformation piece. And so, Minister Schneider, I would like to come to you now on what Senator Whitehouse was talking about. And I think it's not just corporate entities, but also our adversaries and competitors who are leveraging disinformation as a part of hybrid warfare campaigns, including around extreme weather events. And if you could speak to how Germany is seeing that nexus between hybrid warfare and climate.
Well, there is one. In Germany, we have a right-wing party, even as being from the executive level. I can say that in the that this party is always looking to the US and taking the stories that were told today on this issue on the stage, and they're just saying there's not a climate change, there's just weather change. That's it. And we need more nuclear and so on. So in Germany, we have a discussion, we have democracy and we have elections, and we have to fight for the approval of the people. And that's why, just let me say, I mean, we have in Europe, we passed a law in November and we didn't have this aim before. And the aim is 90% reduction of our emissions until 2040. This is now European law, even approved by the European Parliament. It's a huge success. Also, we have these debates even in the European Parliament. It's mostly the right-wing parties who deny all the knowledge of science. I mean, just to put the point on what is possible to do in a society that has democratic decisions to make, to have legitimation. And I just want to take this gas point, the LNG. I mean, in Germany, we were totally dependent on gas from Russia. And it was a security question. At the end, Russia had made a shutdown. We didn't have access to gas. And we spent a lot of money to serve and save our economy, to be independent in our decision towards Ukraine to help them and to support them in their war freedom. So I'm really aware of these dependencies, especially on the energy sector. And the result is that we diversify. We don't buy anything from Russia anymore. And we diversify. And most of the gas is coming from pipelines, pipeline gas. 90% is pipeline gas from Norway, Netherlands, other European countries. And 10% is LNG. And from these LNGs, 90% is from the US. Okay. And we need it for a period of time until we have enough renewable energies in the grid. And our aim, as I mentioned, is 80% of our energy is now needed in 2030, so coming from renewables. And it's tough to put all the windmills onshore. And being elected for many times in Eastern Germany, where the right-wing party is strong, it's not as easy to get support for it if the people have nothing from it. So what I'm putting to the table is we always have to, you made it, Senator, how does it affect normal people's lives and who's paying the bill? Is this question on who's paying the bill is one that is really important even for the supporters of solutions to prevent climate change. And I'm going to look at this with subsidies and to help people with lower incomes to live sustainable. And this is an important point that, to be honest, I think we missed that in the last decade, and maybe this made these right-wing parties stronger and gave them a point. Also, most of the people know they can't live like the decades before.
I'd say it's actually a little bit more than that. I'm here on Codell McCain, named after John McCain, who was very active in the Munich Security Conference and who famously said that Russia is a gas station run by gangsters that has an army. And that gas station part is significant. And I think what you're seeing here in Europe is that the climate denial operation that the fossil fuel industry built in the United States has now metastasized over here to Europe and is performing the same disinformation functions. And at the same time, Russia, both as a fossil fuel entity and as an anti-democracy authoritarian state that would like to disrupt Europe, is also engaged in that same disinformation. And I think it's very important that as a society we pay attention not just to the messages that float around in our political atmosphere, but trace them down to their sources and understand who is behind the disinformation. I think the public is very well served by that, and it can really affect public understanding when people know, oh, that message, right, that comes from Exxon and Vladimir Putin. That gives me a point of reference to understand it. And I think that needs to be said. You're living through what we have been through with fossil fuel disinformation, and you have the Putin effect making it worse.
Absolutely. Thank you for making that connection. We have just a couple minutes before we want to move to the room, but I want to give both the Minister and Mads a moment to jump in here. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, I think oftentimes in this conversation we can get very focused on the risks and the threats and not as much on the solutions and approaches going forward. So if you had just one message that you could convey to security leaders here about where to focus to manage these security threats of climate change, where would you put it? So Minister, I'll turn to you first.
I would put it that as much attention we give for the emission control, we need to look at resilience and adaptation. Otherwise, you're going to sacrifice a lot of human beings in between, livestock, human beings, in our eagerness, which is a justified eagerness, to save the climate for the earth. But then equally look at resilience. Second, technologies will have to talk to each other. There's no way in which each one of us can say, I've built a perfect system, I can take care of my climate concerns. And third, differentiated treatment for paying for it. It cannot be that countries which have less contributed to emission are made to pay equally. So the payment or bearing the cost of climate action will have to have a differentiated treatment. Polluter pays.
Thank you. Mads, last word?
No, I completely agree. I think I'll just mention two things. I think one is we have to find mechanisms where we make those most responsible for the problems we're in also pay for it. And that takes mechanisms to do that. There's right now, I think, promising conversations happening in the UN tax convention that could be a source of financing for ensuring that we don't leave the bills with those most impacted for it and least responsible for it. But there needs to be many more. Right now we have these rocket profits that are still flowing into the oil companies, to the fossil fuel industries. Why can't we find ways to tax that in a way and thereby share the burden? So I think that's important. I think the second message I would have is we can't give up on multilateralism. We know how difficult it looks right now, but there are some beacons of hope out there. We've just secured last year a global oceans treaty, the BBNJ. Germany played a very important role in that. I'm very thankful for that. But other countries did as well. It's the first time we have a global treaty potentially governing the high seas, the big part of our planet that is unregulated and has been until now. That's an example to follow, that there are these issues where we can come together still. So we cannot, in this confusion we are in right now, where we are sort of scrambling for the new world order, and everyone talks about that now it is the power of the strong. But we need to come together. We've seen some revival of 19th century's examples of resource colonialism recently. We cannot let that flourish. And that needs to be confronted, and I think that's why I hope that everyone has listened carefully to the advice from Gavin Newsom and some of our American colleagues that have been working with and against the administrations recently. Take off or get off your knees and stand up to what is happening here. And I hope everyone also heard what Macron suggested, namely that we stop buying into the narrative that we hear about a weak Europe. There is a lot of force of good in Europe that can be galvanized if we still believe in multilateralism, if we still believe in global collaboration.
If you wouldn't mind, can I add one
Very
point?
briefly, yes.
It's not as if we are speaking as if everybody else has to do the work and we have nothing. India has increased its commitment to the climate action. We were at something like 3.7% of our GDP 6 years ago, spending on climate action. But today, we are somewhere close to 5.6%. So more than doubled in a matter of 6 years. We've put money to achieve the targets or the nationally determined commitments. So we are not waiting for funds to come from, technologies to come from elsewhere, but they should come. Even if India can't go beyond this, I fear many African countries wouldn't be even able to reach this or this far. I'm not trying to patronize them, but limitations will have to be understood.
Thank you. All right, we have some microphones around the room for questions. Let's go here in the front row. First, please just state your name and organization briefly, and then a brief question.
Thank you very much. My name is Tony Agatha. I'm the EU Climate Envoy. Super happy to be here and that we're talking about climate because people commiserate with me when I tell them what I do. But I just wanted to, if I'm allowed to put some positive spin. I don't want to gainsay anything that was said here because I believe, especially the cost of inaction, which the senator so eloquently put. But no one should mistake a downward political cycle, which we are in, with an upward economic trend. There's a crisis of confidence. A lot of people dealing with this that we're like, not even green hushing, but green gagging ourselves because others want us to believe that it's all false. But if you look at the economic indicators, how solar has come down from 68% since 2015 in prices. If you look at that, the last 4 years, Wall Street bankers are earning money more in green projects than in fossil fuels. 950 institutional investors around the world saying we're going to, 4 out of 5 of them saying we're going to increase our green allocations. It is happening. The transition is happening. And for the EU, there's no going back. For us, staying the course is economic sense and it's geopolitical sense. And I think we should be a bit confident about that. And thank you for allowing me to say that.
And I would only add that none of that matters unless we figure out a way to put a price on carbon pollution. There are no remaining pathways to climate safety because of the time we've wasted that don't require us to put a price on carbon. The fossil fuel industry's free-to-pollute business model is now inescapably lethal to climate safety. So all that progress is real and it's to be celebrated, but this isn't a question of just relativity. At some point, the boat sinks. And we can't allow the boat to sink. And the only method we have that prevents the boat from sinking is to put a proper price on fossil fuel emissions.
All right. Another hand here, this woman up front.
Isha Bhatia, Deutsche Welle. My question is for Minister Sitaraman. Ma'am, you recently presented the Union budget, and a huge share has been given to the Green India mission, which is a very welcoming step. But at the same time, the Central Pollution Control Board budget was reduced. Now, Geeta Gopinath, she reminded us at Davos that the estimated cost of air pollution on the Indian economy is about $150 billion annually. In view of that, could you please explain the reallocation of funds in the environment sector? You did mention the numbers, that the amount of percentage of GDP that is being used. But if you could just explain the reallocation of these funds, please. Thank you.
Well, Indian budget, the reallocations happen based on the demand from the concerned department or from that state. So if you're particularly looking at the air pollution aspect, the Pollution Control Board is not the only agency. There are very many other agencies which are working together. Well, they can work better is a different story. So allocations are made once at the stage of budget estimates, which is the number we give out during tabling the budget. But subsequently, through the year, depending on their increased requirement, there is a supplementary demand for grants which goes to the Parliament sometime in autumn. We increase the grant based on the demand at that time. So it's a dynamic process. So no one number actually gives you the picture.
I think this gentleman here had a question. I'm sorry, does anyone behind? Don't want to miss you.
Yes, German Zettelmeier, director of Bruegel, a think tank based in Brussels. So I have a question for Senator Whitehouse and one for Minister.
Thank you for your work.
So much, Senator. So the question to the Senator is, I mean, most of us have hope that the US will continue to reduce emission based on the efforts at the state level and because of commercial motives. And so how much should we pin on these hopes? And in this context, is the decision of the Trump administration to rescind the endangerment finding, is it important or is it not important? Is it something that just affects the APA, or do you see this as being as real a watershed? And for the minister, so most of us recognize that India has stepped up efforts on climate action. Most of us also think that it is not enough because it is the projected emissions are quite far from net zero consistent emissions. So the trade-off, I guess, is between development and climate. What can the rest of the world to ameliorate that trade-off for India? What kind of support would you need from the rest of the world to accelerate, in particularly energy transition, while at the same time maintaining the 2047 growth objective?
Well, I'll start with the repeal of the endangerment finding, which I think is very important as an illustration of the depths to which the Trump administration will go in the service of its big fossil fuel donors. As a practical matter, from an emissions point of view, there was nothing useful that they were going to do anyway. and it's quickly reversible by a new administration. So I think it's less a danger to our emissions future than it is an opportunity to really put a spotlight on the depth of the corruption that is involved right now. I hate to say this about my own country, but I think it's absolutely the truth. There's simply no other explanation for it. And on cost question, yes, we are seeing very significant cost reductions. And that is going to put the Trump administration in a very difficult situation, which is when they block, for instance, offshore wind off the coast of my state, they block 9 cent per kilowatt hour power from coming on to an 18 cent per kilowatt hour grid. And obviously that is not good for consumers. Americans are deeply concerned about cost, so they open up a massive political liability for themselves. The problem, the way they get through that is to tell lies and to pretend that clean energy is expensive. All you have to do is read the contract. I don't think there's a place in the world where 9 cents is not less expensive than 18 cents. But they say it because they must, because they have to defend their scheme politically. So I think we're at the point now where we really have to come into focus in order to succeed. And one focus is it can't be free to pollute, and the other is that the disinformation and corruption operation has to be lifted up and elevated and become part of the conversation, and we've been way too nice about all of that villainy for too many years.
Thanks, Senator. Minister?
Just to take a point from Senator's mentioning on the cost. India too is a very cost-conscious economy. We also want power distribution costs and the unit per electricity unit which comes to be cost effective. And we can add to Senator's observation, the more the competition, the more the opening up of the market, we find renewable energy costs coming down, and significantly at that. So today, India's solar energy, every bid that any state government goes for establishing solar energy generation centers, the cost is drastically coming down to, today it's come down to somewhere between 4 rupees 30 paise per unit, which was only 5 years, 10 years ago at 40 rupees. So opening up for fair competition and bidding out has shown that price of renewable energy is attractive. One. Second, the reason why I spoke in my opening statement about technologies and such technologies which can talk to each other is also to understand how, when this flow is, what is the technology we want? We want sharing of technology with us, because 1.4 billion people depend on power that we can generate, and generate in an eco-friendly, sustainable way. So if there are technologies which we are not asking for free, come and do the business there, earn out of it, please give us the technology. That's where we want people to be open on sharing technologies, because it's for the larger cause. India is a large economy. If it succeeds, the world's economy also moves in that direction.
I think we can squeeze in one more question. I saw a hand over here. I'll have to be fast, though. So.
Thank you. Andreas Berger from Swiss Re. We are a reinsurer, so the shock absorber from the insurance industry that you mentioned. So just wanted to bring in another dimension. The real problem, obviously, yeah, climate change is one problem, but the real problem is really population growth. And I got all the attention here. I might give the microphone to this one. Yeah. Population growth, and with population growth, accumulation of assets, in particular in those areas that are NatCat exposed, natural catastrophe exposed. There's so much data available, and so many tools can be used. But the problem is too big to be solved by one party only. This is a plea for public-private partnerships here. Tell the people how to use land, number one. Building codes, building materials. The wildfires, the losses that occurred there were predictable. You could model that, and by using the right instruments or tools or materials, that could help as well. Now, I'm not denying all the policies that could be introduced, but at the moment we need to help people because the protection gap is increasing, the insured losses versus the losses that are not insured, economic losses. That's widening, in particular also in the US. It's not a third emerging markets problem. So tools are there, the pleas for public-private partnerships, that can be done today, right now.
Wonderful. I'm going to give each panelist just 30 seconds very briefly. I think the heart of that question is how do we get ahead, right? How do we prepare for these threats as opposed to being caught on the back foot in partnership with the private sector? Minister, we'll just go around very briefly.
Yeah, I would be happy we would have these growing population problems in Germany. We don't have. It's in all over Europe. But you're right, for the world, especially in the areas that are most affected. We price carbon in Germany and Europe. We will continue that. There will be hot debates with India, other countries because of CBAM. And we had this in Belém with the adaptation question. You raised that. And my point is we have to do both, adapt and prevent climate change and do climate action. This is what I would ask you to do it together. And I mean, you manage it with the energy sector. These renewables were grown up here in Germany by law. I've been in Parliament these years, 2000, and then now they change the world. And with these new technologies, be open for new technologies, with price resources, and invent new products or techniques that could be a good way to come along and not only do the adaptation. I hope you are still investing in Germany, right, for the insurance.
All right, Mads, 30 seconds.
I don't know if you can cover that in 30 seconds, but I think we have to be real about this. And the fact is that there are some of these cascading risks that cannot be adapted to. And therefore, the only sustainable strategy is stop burning fossil fuels. It's the only thing that works, and we have to accelerate that. And I think that there the space for public-private civil sector is huge. As I mentioned before, I think we have a whole continent just south of Europe. We have many parts of the world who want to work constructively. There are key barriers, whether it is the debt burden, whether it is de-risking. There are so many strategies that could be applied in order to scale that. Now, as I said, in Europe right now, we've chosen a different pathway. Right now, I hope we can still get it back on track, but right now it's not on the right track. The scale of investments that are happening in order to actually overcome this renewables in our own zone, but also in others, is simply not where it needs to be.
Thank you. Minister?
India will continue to invest in renewable energy. In fact, we've been building up on that. Carbon capture strategies have been funded in this budget so that we can have it across the country, because it's such a country, and businesses are there in the mainland area and also in the remote parts. So carbon capture is getting incentivized, and our commitment to move towards the nationally determined commitments for the renewable sector is actually 2/3 achieved much before, in fact 4 years ahead of the given date. So we are given the date, but well ahead of it we are trying to fulfill, and we shall do that even in the future.
Thank you. Senator?
If there is a pathway still to climate safety, and I hope and trust that there is, it depends on the success of the CBAM and the expansion of the CBAM to the UK, Australia, Canada, and other economies. It is the only extant global price on carbon, and without that we fail. So there is going to be, I think, considerable pressure brought by industry forces, brought through the Trump administration by those industry forces to try to weaken or undo it. And I would simply, sitting here in Munich in the center of Europe, urge our European Union friends, thanking Bruegel for the wonderful work they did to support the CBAM. It is our last lifeboat. At all costs, don't let it be torpedoed.
Thank you all very much. Please join me in thanking the entire panel for for keeping climate on the front lines of the national security conversation here in Munich. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.